Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Made You Book. My name's Gretchen and today we're going to talk about my 12 favorite reads from 2023. So just to be clear, this is not a list exclusive to books that were published in 2023. This is just the list of the 12 best books that I've read. There are a lot still that were published in 2023, but there is a mix of ones that are a little older. So also this does not include any rereads. I always reread my favorite book at least once a year, and I also did that, but it is not included in this list. This was only going to include books that were brand new to me. So without further ado, let's get into the books. All right, so coming in at number 12, I actually sadly cannot find my copy of this book, so I apologize for that, but number 12 was The Days of Abandonment by Elena Ferrante, and that book is translated from the Italian by Anne Goldstein, and it was published by Europa in 2005. So that book, oh, it was such a surprise for me. So basically, the story goes, after about 15 years of marriage, we have our main character, Olga. She is abruptly left by her husband, Mario. He leaves her with 2 children, and he runs away with the daughter of one of his colleagues. And one of the kind of icky things about the whole situation, and a reason why Olga is even further struggling with it, is that they first met this woman as a like they all knew her, and Olga knows her because it's a friend's colleague, but they met her first when she was only 15 years old. So that just really gets to Olga. So she starts looking for answers as to why her husband has left her, why Olga, wasn't adequate enough, why he left her for this, very young woman. And once she kind of pinpoints her answer, she kind of spirals into crisis as the reality of facing life on her own without a husband sets in, and the day-to-day responsibilities of life start to pile up. And this book was so good. It was sharp. It was unapologetic. It's one of those books that really taps into the mind of someone that's struggling. She's struggling with betrayal. She's struggling with loss, and she eventually gets to the point where she finds redemption, but it's not an easy ride for her. Ferrante, as an author, if you've never read anything by her, I highly encourage you to do so. She is not afraid to write shocking things, and she doesn't sugarcoat how flawed we can be as humans, especially when we're facing crossroads in our life. So it's a short little book. I read it in a weekend afternoon, and it's small, but it hits very hard, and I absolutely loved it. Okay, so moving on to number 11. So that is going to be Open Throat by Henry Hoke. And this follows our main character. They are a lonely, queer mountain lion living near the Hollywood sign. And as the days go on, they're able to observe all of the humans that are hiking in the area, and they listen to these humans talk about their tragedies, their traumas, dealing with their identities, and this eventually gets the mountain lion to start to ponder those things as well. So eventually we get to the point where there is a fire and the mountain lion is pushed out and down into the streets of LA, and they encounter a teenage girl. And after that, like, I don't want to spoil anything, because I think if I continue to talk about what happens, it's going to definitely get into spoiler territories. And I want you to experience this on your own if you read it. So what I loved about this book is that it was a book unlike anything that I've read before. It walks a really fine line with being innocent and charming, but also menacing. So you kind of get that feeling, you know, something is going to happen, and it at times seems super ordinary. You tap into the life of this mountain lion, and it sometimes seems as mundane as our lives as humans. And but like as I started to read it, I was like, wow, like you could swap out this mountain lion with a human and vice versa. And it was really interesting. And it was very absurd at times, obviously, but the way that I kind of pictured it in my mind and as I was reading it was, imagine like an upper middle class PTA bake sale, and all the moms laced the cupcakes with LSD. It was like that for me. You had your very human side, but then you had you also had your very like trippy side to it as well. This little novel was super unique. It was disturbing, darkly comical, which I am always a fan of, and it at times was immensely heartwarming and heartbreaking. Such a little surprise for me, and I am so glad I decided to pick it up. And it's another very short one. All right. Okay, so let's move on to number 10, and that is Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. This was published in 2023, and this one was actually shortlisted for the National Book Awards. So there are several book prize nominees that I read this year, and this was truly a standout for me. So this is a near future dystopian where TV entertainment is powered by this show called The Chain Gang All-Stars. And basically you have prisoners that are pitted against each other in these gladiator style type death matches, with the ultimate prize being their freedom. And I know that that premise can be immediately off-putting for a lot of readers, but trust me, this book is so much more than gratuitous violence. It is a lot, or the author has a lot to say, and he tackles each issue with shocking images and events, but he balances it out so well with an incredible amount of humanity. So I already did a full-length review of this book, and I'll link that video in the comments. But the last thing that I will say about this book is it's remained with me since I've read it. I read it fairly early on this year, and I often find myself thinking about it. And I truly think that if a book can get you to do that, that's what makes a book good. Whether you liked it or hated it, books that you continually think about are always going to be those books that are the best, and the ones that the author is they're doing what they set out to do. So I absolutely cannot wait to see what this author comes out with next. All right, moving on to number 9, we have Wandering Souls by Cecile Pinn. And this was published in 2023 by Holt, and this one was longlisted for the Women's Prize. It's a shame that it didn't get shortlisted. I definitely think that it should have. So this story tells, it's deeply tragic. It's a story of 3 Vietnamese children. I think their ages are 16, 13, and I think 9 or 10. And they're orphaned, escaping the post-war Vietnam. They're trying to get to Hong Kong, and them and their family set out on 2 boats, and they end up making it, the 3 of them, but the rest of their family, 2 parents and several siblings, are killed on the journey. So once they arrive to Hong Kong, they're very quickly sent to the UK. And this is set during Thatcher era UK. And the oldest, who is the daughter, her name is An, and she really struggles to make ends meet. She has these 2 young siblings to take care of, and she's trying to figure things out in a UK that was not very welcoming to them and resentful of them being there. And what I'll say is that Pinn did such an amazing job. This book was very well researched. She's a young author, and to be able to accurately be able to write about that time, you can tell that she spent a lot of time researching this book. And she also peppered in things that forced me to go and educate myself on, which I love when books do that. If you're not familiar with Operation Wandering Souls, which is what the title is obviously named after, it was this psychological war tactic that the U.S. military used in the Vietnam War. The Vietnamese have a long-standing tradition of believing that their dead need to be properly buried or their souls will wander the earth forever. And they basically weaponized that by playing recordings of the dead, speaking to them, and it was super sad. But for as sad as this novel is, it also filled me with a tremendous amount of hope, and it's likely to be a book that I continue to think about years from now. And once again, she's super young, and there's so much promise for her, and she's gonna be one of those authors that the next book that she puts out, I'm immediately gonna pick up because this was such a beautiful book. And once again, it's a nice little short book. All right, now coming in at number 8, we have Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. This is another book that was on the Women's Prize list. This one was actually shortlisted, and it was published in 2022 by Riverhead. Now, this was another book that had me on an emotional roller coaster. This book takes place in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and it follows our main character, Kushla. So she is a young woman. I think she's in like her mid-20s, and she is a Catholic school teacher, but she kind of moonlights as a barmaid at her brother's pub. And one night she meets his patron. His name is Michael, and he is an older man in his 50s, and he's married, and he's also Protestant. So obviously being set in the Troubles, Kushla's Catholic and Michael is Protestant. So immediately we have conflict. But they quickly take to each other and they start this passionate affair. And outside of the thread of the affair, we also learn about one of her students. So Kushla has a little student named Davy, and Davy is, she takes a shine to him. He's bullied, and he's very poor, and he gets made fun of for that. He also has an older brother, and one day his father, or their father, is severely beaten, and Kushla kind of stands in and kind of helps, take care of the boys a little whenever his father was unable to. So she tries to help as much as she can. And then from there, the book, like after that event happens, the book just picks up this speed, and Kushla's life and all of those around her that she loves completely turns upside down on its head. This book could have easily been double the page count because it covers so much, and Kennedy does such a good job of packing it all in. She tackles so many things, and she does it in a very eloquent and respectful way. I mean, we have taboo love, we have adultery, we have familial love, we have found family, politics, religion. It also covers abuse within the Catholic Church. Like, there's so much. Not only that, but we are set in the backdrop of unimaginable violence going on during the Troubles. So this book was superb, and I'm so excited to read more from her. And actually, she has now I know that there are a lot of people out there that may have already read this, but it's just recently been released in the States. She has a short story collection called the end of the world is a cul-de-sac. Yeah, that's what it's called. And I cannot wait to read that. And hopefully, since that was a re-release from years ago, maybe she has another novel coming out soon. Hopefully, fingers crossed. But yeah, highly recommend this one as well. All right, moving on to number 7. So now we have Nevis by Sacha Naspini. And this was translated from the Italian by Clarissa Botsford, and it's a Europa edition. I don't know the exact publication date, but it's been out for a couple years. Now, this was my most surprising find of the year. You all know, if you follow my channel, I am absolute trash for Europa editions, and even if I don't know anything about it, I will grab it. And I was wandering around aimlessly in my library one day, and I found this teeny tiny little book, like pushed in the back, and I saw the little Europa logo, and I figured, what the heck, it's 96 pages. If I don't like it, it's not that big of a commitment, but boy, am I glad that I found this little gem. So this book follows our main character, Nevis, and the book literally opens with her finding her husband dead in a pig pen on their little Tuscan farm. Now, when she found him and through the funeral and all that preparation, she didn't cry, she didn't break down, and she really didn't show any type of emotion in the days after his death. But soon, like once the reality of being alone starts to set in, she gets lonely, and she ends up moving her favorite chicken named Giacomina into the house with her. And she has basically found, company as a cure for her loneliness with this chicken. So one day, the chicken, has a medical event, and Nevis is devastated and she doesn't know what to do, but she calls her long lost friend, who is also a veterinarian, and his name is Laureano, and the rest of the book is just the contents of that phone conversation. So maybe like the first, 5 to 10 pages are setting up the incident, and then the rest of the book is literally their phone conversation. And we learn so much about her grief, their past together, Nevis and Laureano, and so much more about Nevis's life. This book was absolutely gripping. I barely came up for air when I was reading it, and I adored this one, and I don't think I've seen anybody else talking about it. So I loved it. And if you're looking for a quick short read, maybe one to get to your reading goal for the end of the year, this is a great one to pick up. All right, we are chugging along. We're up to number 6, and that is going to be The Birthday Party by Laurent Mauvignier. This was translated from the French by Daniel Levin Becker, and it was published in 2023 in the States by Transit Books, but if you're in the UK, it was a Fitzcarraldo edition. I really wish I had the Fitzcarraldo edition. I love them. I know people hate on them, but I love how simple they are. And this one was also longlisted for the International Booker. Now, this book had me in its claws, and it was literally the sole reason for like 3 solid days of grumpiness for me for lack of sleep back in July when I read it. It was so good. And I never would have picked it up or have known about it if it wasn't for the International Booker. And I honestly didn't know anything about it when it was nominated, and I picked it up blind. Like, I didn't read the back. I kind of like doing that sometimes, like completely going into a book blind, and I'm really glad that I picked this one. And at first, this book was really quiet, and I got into maybe like the first maybe 20, 30 pages, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's a book, like we're booking. But then all of the sudden it picked up so fast that I could not literally put this book down. It's a dense book. It's very dense. It's heavy. It takes place over a single day, and I love books like that. It's set in this tiny little remote hamlet in France, and it follows 4 primary narratives. So the residents within the hamlet. So we have Patrice Bourgogne. He is planning a surprise birthday party for his wife, Marion, who is another narrator. And Marion, she's harboring this horrible secret. She never wants to reveal that to her family. So obviously, we're going to have something happen. And then we have Ida, their daughter, and we have finally Christine, who is an elderly woman that lives just across the way in the same hamlet. And as the book starts, Patrice starts planning his party, and from there's just one after another, a series of events that just start to stack up, and it basically turns that quiet little hamlet, their life in that hamlet, into an absolute nightmare. Novels that switch narratives, they can be a little clunky and sometimes hard to follow, but the way Mauvignier did it, it was seamless. He was masterful at the transitions, and he just continued to build tension along the way as we progressed through the story, and it continued until the very, very end. And I was just breathless at the end of this book. Loved this one, and another book I don't hear enough people talking about. And I think maybe it's because it is a little slower at the beginning, but if you can get past that part, whew, it's a ride. All right, so here we are at number 5. And this, I'm a little scared about this one. I'm not gonna lie. So at number 5, we have Whale by Chan-myeon Kwang. And this is translated from the Korean by Chi Young Kim. This was published by Europa Editions in 2023, and this book was shortlisted for the International Booker this year. So the reason that I am nervous about this book is this is one of those books that I love, but I recommend very rarely because this book is extremely polarizing, and for good reason. There's a lot to process with this book, and arguments that I've heard about from people that dislike it are very valid. And I respect their arguments. However, for me, this is a very memorable book. And I honestly don't think that I have ever read anything that could replicate this. And I was just in absolute awe of this book for many reasons. So this book was originally published, I think maybe, or it was early 2000s, I think maybe like 2004. And this is considered a modern Korean classic. So this book is well loved in Korea, and it has reached kind of that classic status. And a lot of people that I have heard talk about this book kind of refer to it as the Korean equivalent to 100 Years of Solitude, and that's for absolute good reason. This book is super laden with magical realism, and me having also loved 100 Years of Solitude, definitely can understand that comparison. So the most important thing about this book to remember, if you are brave enough to go into it, is you have to keep in mind that this is satire and it's intentionally shocking and brutal. That's part of the point of this book. And for those of you that go into it not knowing that, it can immediately be off-putting very early on. This book is also surreal, it's folkloric, and like I said, it has all of those elements of magical realism that if you like magical realism, you're probably going to get more out of this book. But if you don't like magical realism, it's not going to be something that you're probably gravitating toward because it is a very heavy component in this. So the other thing, kind of like the elephant in the room with this book, is that it is very graphic. It's graphic with sex, violence, blatant, and I mean blatant misogyny, but it also balances itself out with humor, heart, and humanity. So that's something to keep in mind going into it. And at the risk of giving up too much about what happens, I really hate to get too much into the plot. But I think there are some things that you need to know about it going in. So the book follows a couple main characters. First and foremost, we have Chun-Wee, and the book starts with her being released from, or her getting out of prison, and she was in prison for arson. And basically the beginning of the story starts with her getting out of prison and returning to the scene of the crime of the place where she was, where she completed her arson. Now, one of the other things to remember about Chun-Yi or know is that she is mute, and that kind of comes into play a little bit later. And before I say what's next, or kind of what happens next in the book, I just want to stress this again. Although it's not an excuse for anything that happens in this book or anything that is written, I think there are, once again, some things that need to be considered. First of all, remembering this is satire is one. Remembering it was originally written in 2005, so it was written almost 20 years ago, and times have definitely changed. And this is also a translated piece of literature as well. So I'm sure that the translator did a fantastic job, but also keep in mind that sometimes things can get lost in translation. And I say that because some of the language that is sometimes used can be offensive. So basically, after we meet Chun-Yi, the next part of the story involves this old crone. And this old crone meets a 15-year-old that they refer to as a half-wit, not my language, theirs. And this 15-year-old supposedly has an abnormally large groin area. And basically this old crone takes advantage of that 15-year-old boy, and eventually becomes pregnant. And what we learn later on is that the child that she gives birth to can speak and understand bees. So once we go through that kind of smaller narrative, we get into our main character, Gumbok, and she's Chun-Yi's mother, and she is a well-known entrepreneur. She is super smart, and she is kind of like the object of lust for a lot of people in the town. She also almost has like this control over them, not only men, but the women as well. And she's super smart, she's super ambitious, and we learn about her, but then we eventually learn about the origins of Chun-Yi's birth, and the story of Gumbok's rise to success, and we eventually learn about her building this movie theater that is built in the shape of a whale, because as a child she was fascinated. One day she saw a whale jumping out of the ocean and cresting, and that kind of sat with her, and she built this theater in honor of that. And I know that what I just threw at you is very weird and crazy, but that's all that I'm going to give you as far as specific goes. I will say this is a wild ride. It's nearly impossible to describe. You have to be immersed in it to even understand what's going on. There are a million different characters. There's a million little subplots, and I I loved this book. It was so entertaining, and it was beautifully written, and it was just it was so unique, and I loved it. And I've heard so many complaints about this book being problematic, and I get it. I completely understand it. And one of the biggest complaints that I hear is specifically about its mistreatment of women. And although that is true, what I will say is a lot of the mistreatment of women happens very early on in the book. And I think that some readers do think that, okay, it's going to be a book completely filled with misogyny. And although it is, that's not the only... It's not focused on that misogyny. I think a lot of readers assumes that because those things happen very early, that it's just going to be women that are objectified, and that is not the case at all. If you carry on reading, you're going to realize that women mistreat the men just as much as the men do. In fact, I would potentially argue more so women mistreating men. And no one is safe from any type of brutality in this book. But I 100% get that it's not for everyone. But if it at all sounds like it's something that you would be interested in, keep in mind that it's satire and set in a time where Korea was well known for its violence and the mistreatment of everyone. Give it a shot if you are brave enough. And once again, I know that I'm not selling this book as well as I should. It's one of those books where it's really hard to describe why I enjoyed it so much, where there were so many reasons why I shouldn't have. But yeah, give it a shot. That's all that I can say. All right, we're at number 4, and that belongs to Elaine Feeney's How to Build a Boat. Now, this book was published in 2023 by Harville Secker, and it was also longlisted for this year's Booker Prize as well. Now, because it was longlisted for the Booker, that's how I came to know this book. And it was actually the last book that I read from the long list. And I just kept putting it off and putting it off. And part of why I did that was I read the synopsis and I was just like, I wasn't inspired by it. I felt that it was kind of simple and maybe even a little juvenile, and I didn't think that it would be anything earth-shattering, and I am so glad that I was wrong, because this book was an emotional gut punch for me. I loved this book, and it had me sobbing at times. It was so beautiful, and the story was just so poignant. So basically, in a nutshell, this book follows our main character, Jamie. He is neurodivergent, and I think he's about 13 years old. And basically, Jamie lost his mother very shortly after she gave birth to him. And he doesn't have much to remember her by, but there is a video clip that he has of her while she was swimming, and that's all that he knows of her. So as he gets older, and he longs more and more for that relationship with his mom and to keep her memory alive, he becomes obsessed with the idea of building a perpetual motion machine to keep her memory alive. And basically, the story follows him trying to find a way to preserve her memory. And we also meet side characters. We have one named Tess. She's one of his teachers. And then we also meet Tig, who is also a teacher, and he eventually convinces Jamie that the best way to or the best project for him to dive into to help deal with his grief is to build a boat. And that's all I'm gonna say about it. I did do a full-length review of this book, and I will post the link in the comments. But this, like I said, it was absolutely stunning. It was so much more than the action of building a boat. It gets into the relationship between Jamie and his two teachers, and then the relationship between the two teachers. And it was just a beautiful story full of heart and hope. And this was definitely another emotional roller coaster for me. And I am so glad that this book came into my life, because I think this is one that will stick with me, and I think that this is a great recommendation for anybody that's looking for kind of a sad girl feel-good story. I loved this book. All right, we've made it to the top 3, and we're going to continue the theme of books that made me cry with Foster by Claire Keegan. Now, I think it might actually be impossible for Claire Keegan to write a bad story. I've read, I think, everything that she has published, and I am just constantly in awe of what an impeccable writer she is. And I cannot believe that she packs so much in such little stories. Like, this is a very short book, but I could not even imagine what she would be able to do with a full-length novel. But so this book was originally published in 2010, but it was just published here in the States in 2022. So it's an older story, but it's small, but oh my gosh, it is mighty. Now, this book takes place in the early 80s, and it follows this little girl. So this little girl, she has a family that they're struggling to make ends meet. They have little money coming in, and they have a new baby on the way, and she is sent by her parents to live with these relative strangers of relatives to help reduce the burden on them with the new baby coming and having a new mouth to feed. So this little girl goes to live with the Kinsellas, and this girl she's not used to or familiar with what it's like to be around a warm and loving family. And she soon finds herself welcomed with open arms into the Kinsellas' home, and her life is forever changed. And I full on ugly cried over this book. This is one of the most moving books I have ever read, and for anyone that's a fan of Anne of Green Gables, this gave me huge Marilla and Matthew vibes. So that was part of why I loved it too. It was nostalgia for me. I was born in the early 80s, and one of the first book series that I ever read was Anne of Green Gables, and this just took me back to that place, and I loved it. This story is going to stay with me forever, and I love it. Also, there was a movie adaptation that was released last year called The Quiet Girl, and it's it is excellent. I actually watched it on a flight, which I do not recommend, unless you want the old lady sitting across the aisle from you digging in her purse for tissues because you're crying like a baby. Then, you know, if you want that, then you can pick up this book. But yeah, Claire Keegan is a master. I don't think you will ever see me on this channel saying anything negative about her writing. I absolutely adore it. And if you haven't had the pleasure of reading this book, you should treat yourself to it, but just have the tissues handy. All right, down to 2 more. And the order of the final 2, I went back and forth. I struggled with making this decision. In fact, it's part of why it's taken me so long to get this video out, because I kept weighing the pros and the cons, and I really just wanted to end up pulling a Pulitzer Prize and just having them share the top spot. But the more I thought about it, I realized I hate that move, and I think it's irresponsible for me as a reader, and it completely goes against the nature of coming up with a best of list. There should always be a number 1. So here we are, and I have settled on the second book, being Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein. This is published by Granta. It was published in 2023, and this book was shortlisted for the Booker Prize this year, and it was also the winner of this year's Giller Prize. So I am not the only one that agrees that this is a great book. Although the reason I finally decided as this being my second choice is that this book has the world divided. Anyone who has read it, so many people loved it, so many people hated it, but obviously I'm team loved it. I adored this book, and I'm still letting it simmer, and the longer I let it simmer, the better it gets. So the basic premise of this book is a young woman moves from home to a foreign country, which also happens to be her family's motherland. And she moves in with her brother, who is recently divorced. His wife left with him and their children. And when she gets there, she has a lot of trouble assimilating to the new location. There's a language barrier. Her brother, after a very short stay, once she arrives, gets called away on business and he's gone. So she's there by herself, and the residents are not taking a shine to her at all. In fact, they have a clear disdain for her, but we don't know why. Like, it's never blatantly explained to us. So, and I think when we talk about the plot, that's pretty much it. Not a lot happens in this book. We find out very little, and I think that that's why I love this book so much, because I, as a reader, was able to come up with my own theories and my own explanations, and I absolutely loved it. So this book was immersive, it was haunting, it left me feeling so uneasy. When you get to the parts about the relationship with her and her brother, super cringy, like off the charts, ew. But for me, this book was less about the story and it was more about the feelings that it gave me. This book is in a category all on its own. And all I can say is give it a chance. If you don't vibe with it very early on, just stop reading it. If your curiosity isn't piqued, that's okay. Just end it and move on. But if you start to read it and you still have those questions, or you're feeling anything, you're feeling disgust, or you're feeling like something sinister is going to happen, or you have that undercurrent of unease, just keep going. However, I won't judge you if you stop, as long as you don't judge me for loving this book, because I know it has divided so many people. I also did a full-length review of this video, which I'll put in my comments as usual. So if you're interested in reading it, I encourage you to do so, but don't force yourself through it because I know it's not for everyone. All right, we have made it. So my number one pick, for any of you that follow my channel, you are probably not surprised, is The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. So this was published in 2023 by FSG, and this was a shortlisted title for this year's Booker Prize. And I love this book. I love this book. So I have talked about this book a lot this year, and it was my personal wish list it was on my personal wish list to win the Booker. And I know I have said and probably bored you to tears with talking about how much I love this book. And I, of course, did a full-length review, which you can watch to get more specific details, but just a brief overview for any of my new viewers that are not familiar with the book. This is an epic family saga. And even though it's it's pretty long. I think it's over 700 pages, maybe? Oh, nope, I lied. It teeters around like 650. Even though it's a big book, I could have easily read 300 more pages of this book. It was that good. So basically, this book is set in Ireland, and I think it's around 2008. Yeah, because that's like kind of when the world financial crisis was going on. And this follows four very distinct narratives, and it switches from POV from each section. And each of the characters at the beginning gets their own section, and then once all four sections are over, then we very quickly kind of go back and forth between each taking a quick little chapter and until we get to the very end. And the very end, the book also changes in its structure to be almost like a screenplay where you have the character's name on the side of the page and a quick little couple paragraphs from them, and then it moves on to the next one. So it almost reads like a screenplay, and it's very appropriate because the very end of this book gets super propulsive and engaging, and it adds to the sense of urgency to get to the end of the book. So that was one of the reasons I loved this, is it had a unique structure and a unique format. And once I got used to it, I appreciated it. I know sometimes when you read books that do things that aren't the normal way books are written, it can be kind of off-putting. But once you get into the pattern and you get used to it, it definitely, it makes the experience much better once you're comfortable with it. So, as I mentioned, this follows 4 different narrators. We start with Cass. She is the daughter. She is close to graduating, and instead of studying and kind of hunkering down, she kind of turns to drinking and basically being obsessed about a toxic friendship that she has with a girl named Elaine. Then we get the narrative of her brother, PJ. And PJ is, I think he's around maybe 11 or 12. And he is he's kind of like walking that line between the innocence of still being a child, but also the beginning of teenage rebellion, where he's starting to get a little angsty and, he's trying to pull away from his parents a little more and kind of establish a little bit more of his independence. But he's still a sweet boy, and he gets kind of tied up with some bullies, and he ends up getting bullied even more because of some actions of his father. Now, the other narrative is Dickie, who is the dad, and he is causing his family a lot of strife because, as I mentioned, this is taking part during the financial crisis of 2008, and he runs an auto dealership that was passed on down to him from his father, and it's starting to go under. And one of the customers that he has a bad experience, and their child knows this, and they take it out on PJ. And so there's a lot of resentment there. Resentment also comes from Cass to her father for the same reasons. Bullying isn't involved, but she is worried about finances. She's ready to go off to uni, and she's worried about how that will be paid for. And then we have Imelda, who is the mom and wife to Dickie. Now, Imelda, she comes from meager means, and she kind of grew up in poverty with a family that was kind of considered low class and maybe even a little maybe trashy. And she came up in the world, and she married Dickie, who was a successful businessman, and she got used to a life of luxury. And now that that's looking to be in jeopardy, she spends her days selling everything that the family owns to kind of keep up appearances. And as we learn more about these characters, everything just starts to fall apart, and it's just like a soap opera. It's bingeable. There's so much drama going on. And as the book progresses, we learn so much about these individual characters. We learn what makes them tick. We learn what drives them. We learn what their motivations are. We learn about all of their dirty, dark little secrets. And as this drama continues, we eventually come to one of the most propulsive and engaging, fast-paced, heart-pounding endings I think that I've ever encountered as a reader. This book had me in its grasp, to say the least. And the main reason why this book took my top spot is that it was so ambitious. It was ambitious in its story. It was ambitious in how all of the narratives wove together. And it was also ambitious because Murray touched on so many different themes and issues that are common among families. We have ones that are, small in scale, and we have these issues that are gigantic. And the way that Murray was able to capture that and deal with it, I think that he just did an absolute amazing job. And one of the other things that I appreciated so much about Murray's work here is I don't know how he was able to get me to both love and hate each of the characters. Like, it's beyond me how I had such affection and I loathed them at times. It was, it was an incredible journey. And honestly, I told you at the beginning that the last, maybe 30 or 50 pages of the book, I absolutely flew through. And when I was done, I literally just closed it and I said, wow, wow. And I sat there for about 5 minutes, just kind of stirring and thinking about it. And the next thing I remember myself saying again was, wow. And I honestly don't know if I'll ever experience that again with another book. I certainly hope that I do, but he had me speechless. And I still think about this book all the time. Murray has set the bar for me personally for literary tension and suspense, and he has set that so high that this is one of those books, and I know people say this all the time, like, this is one of those books that I would love to be able to experience again for the first time. And I know there were a lot of haters out there that disliked the ending, but I personally thought that it was perfect. I wouldn't want it to be done any other way. And I love when I can finish a book and my mind still carries on with it. And that's the kind of writing that I crave as a reader. And this could potentially be one of my top books of all time. Murray knocked it out of the park for me with this one. And I am so glad that I read this, and I adored this, and I truly think that this could end up being a modern classic because of how engaging it was, how relevant it is to the time, and just the way it was almost like it was almost Tolstoyan. Is that a word, Tolstoyan? In nature for me, the way that he was able to just paint that picture of this family drama, and I absolutely adored this. And if you haven't read it, if you're on the fence, give it a shot. But yeah, my number one pick for this year, The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. All right, so that's it, my 12 best books of 2023. This has been an amazing experience, and I'm so excited to see what 2024 will bring as far as books go. Thanks again to all of you for your continued support, and I hope all of you have a happy and healthy 2024 to come. May it be free from DNFs and may your hold times at the library be super short. And if you enjoyed this video, please like or subscribe. And until we read again, bye.